Dr. Jim Glancey, we're going to ask him to come up. Dr. Jim Glancey is going to talk about electrocution and fire houses outside your poultry house. So he's going to make you think a little more about some little different things. So, Dr. Glancey, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jenny. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Jim Glancey. I'm an engineer, and I'm going to go about this slightly differently in the sense that I'll show you some things you should do, but along the way, some things you probably shouldn't do, or at least be aware of, things people have done, and kind of let's all learn from their mistakes. And I'll start with a farmhouse, believe it or not, up in northwest PA, between Pittsburgh and Erie. And this is actually a farmhouse, part of a large farm that was, in the fire, I'll explain in a few minutes, was a result of an electrical problem on the farm, believe it or not, and it wound up catching the house on fire, believe it or not, and people inside the house at the same time. But I'll come back to this. So I'm going to kind of show you some examples I've seen along the way and kind of think about them and things we can do to prevent those kinds of things. So with that, some terms I'm going to use, you've heard a lot of these already today. Electrical wires, you know, would be along outside the road or along the road. The major primary wires, the primary distribution lines, you know, those are the major lines that, you know, distribute electricity to a whole portion of the county, if you will. You know, we're talking about 30,000 volts for those wires that are up high on the poles. And by the way, most of those, believe it or not, are not insulated. Those are bare copper wires, keep in mind. And I'll come back to why we need to worry about that if it's not already obvious. So they bring the wire to a portion of the county. They'll then drop down to a transformer here. And you've all seen transformers. They take it from that real high voltage down to normally about 220, 240 volts, which is ultimately the service that comes into your poultry house, right? We've all seen that before. Main thing to keep in mind is that primary line and then that lower voltage secondary line that actually comes onto your premises, on the farm, if you will, and the hardware associated with that, mainly the transformer. And just along the way, some things to keep in mind in terms of what code, and I'm going to talk about code. And this is code you don't need to worry about, but your electric utility will need to worry about, and you need to be the eyes and ears of your electric utility, whether it's the co-op or Delaware Power. You know, they're not out there inspecting every day, so when you see a problem, you know, you pick up a phone and you call them and say, I think I see an electrical hazard. They're going to be there quick. But you can help them, and you can help yourselves by helping them identify problems. So first and foremost, are the wires too close to the ground? You know, there are standards for this, and just to kind of remind everybody, we're talking about the wires coming on to your property. That's the secondary wire, a lower voltage, about 220, 240 volts. You know, at the road, it often comes off or sags down to about 15.5 feet, if you will, at a minimum, but should be higher. And I'm pointing this out for a reason. This turns out to be a pretty significant hazard on farms, especially when you start moving equipment around, if you will. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. And as that wire comes off the farm or onto the farm from the power lines on the road, you know, they're going to go over other structures, other buildings on your farm, and they can be pretty close. This is actually the National Electric Safety Code standards for how far that wire coming onto your property, if you do have overhead lines, can get to other buildings. For example, you know, when you're talking about a shed without roof access, you know, you can be down about 3 feet. And one of the cases I've looked at was a guy up on his farm house building, was working on it, had a piece of aluminum flashing 10 feet long, turned the wrong way, electrical flashing hit that wire, and he became part of the electric circuit, just like you had heard about before. Got knocked off the building about 20 feet and was crippled for the rest of his life as a result. So be aware, lines are allowed to come pretty close to buildings, especially depending on the roof access. So keep it in mind when you're up on roofs, first and foremost, identify where those overhead wires are. It's going to be critical for your own safety and making sure you avoid those at all costs. And in kind of thinking along those ways, you know, there are rules of thumb that the power companies use, and you should use too, in terms of how far you need to stay away from electric lines. That line coming onto your property is probably about between 200 and 240 volts, somewhere in there. that means you need to stay at least 10 feet away from it. That is the rule. You stay 10 feet away from that. That's your body, that's your equipment, that's your skid loader, that's your front end loader, that's the feed truck that pulls in your yard, all of which need to stay that far away. And I'll show you an example of somebody who got too close in a minute. But getting back to, you know, that wire off the ground only by code needs to be about 16 feet off the ground. If the intent is to say 10 feet away, you can be very close to that wire very quickly with just a relatively tall piece of equipment. So be careful, and be careful of not only yourself and what you do, but others who come onto your farm with equipment. And I'll talk about ways we can actually protect some of these wires from what the utilities offer as kind of free service, if you will. Back to things we shouldn't do. Tree trimmer. That's a boom truck that they own. That's up about 50 feet. And they decided they had a tree to trim that was too difficult to get to by going around the long way. So they bought their boom truck out, hooked the guy into it with a chainsaw, and decided to lift them over the power lines. Yeah, yeah. It's one of the, somebody said freak accident or words to that effect when they asked the question. This you could call this a freak accident, but nine out of 10 people would have said, don't ever even think about it, right? But here's a guy. I actually saw him last summer, and as you can see, what happened to him, they lost sight of him, or they lost sight of the wires. We're not sure yet. They dropped the guy down onto those 30,000 volt wires. And you know, the previous speaker talked about it. Low voltage can kill you. That real high voltage will just cut your flesh right in two. And as you can see, the guy lost his right leg. His leg came down in contact with that high voltage, and it just essentially singed it right off. It didn't cut it off, but it burned it so bad they had to amputate. So back to why did this happen? Poor judgment, obviously, by the company, but it does reinforce the notion, not only not to touch it, but keep that 10-foot rule in the back of your mind. Stay away. This stuff does not screw around in terms of the hazards that it creates. Okay, and that's him actually showing me the harness he was wearing when he was up hanging off of that boom truck. So kind of keeping that in mind, what can we do now to start protecting ourselves around the power lines and the lines outside the poultry house? I work a lot with the Delaware co-op, but I think Chop Tank offers the same kinds of services for free, believe it or not. They will come out, and they do routinely, but also at your request, check your power poles. Those wooden poles along the road and any poles they're responsible for on your property, they will come out and check those for free. And they'll also check those conductor distances. It showed you, pictures before of how far they should be from a building, from the ground, if you will. That's something you need them to come out and check. Don't ever think about taking an aluminum tape measure and trying to reach the wire, right? That goes without saying. Don't do that. But your power company, your utility will come out and do that for you if you think you have a problem, for free no less. The other thing they'll do, they'll check their grounding. You heard of grounding this morning being important. Grounding is equally important to get it right from the utility, the co-op's perspective, if you will. They'll come out and check grounding as far as they can onto your property as well, for free, again, for free. And often one of the big culprits in terms of things going wrong are neutral. That neutral line that doesn't carry much voltage, but it carries current, that often becomes a culprit. They'll come out and check neutrals up to the point where they're responsible for as well, again, for free. That's a phone call away to get a free check and make sure your system's properly connected. Something you probably should have done every year, every couple years, just to be safe. They'll do it. They may not do it the day after you call, but the next time they're in your area, they'll probably come out and check it. The other thing utilities will do, and I know the co-op does this because I've worked with them on this, is free troubleshooting. They'll come out and put a little computer, what we call a data logger, on your farm, and they'll actually watch the voltage and watch the electrical current you're using as a means to see if there is a problem, or if you already know there's a problem, what the problem is. For example, low voltage. One of the things motors don't like, electric motors don't like, AC motors, is low voltage. When the voltage goes down and it still has to meet that load demand, electric current goes up. And as more current flows, more heat happens, makes motors hot. So maintaining and making sure your utility is giving you proper line voltage is something they'll do for free, and something you should have checked once in a while, even if it's every few years. And again, they'll do it for free. They'll also check your current. They'll measure how much electric current you're demanding over the course of a day. And the other interesting thing they'll do, they'll actually come out and check and monitor for about a week current going into your ground, the ground stakes that go into the ground. What do we want that current going into the safety ground to be? How much electricity do you actually want flowing into the ground for safety purposes? The answer is 0. You want none, but they'll come out and make sure it is none. If you do have electricity going into your grounds, the earth grounds, that's an indication you've got some kind of short somewhere, which will be another way to kind of get an idea if you've got a problem in your house or not. And again, this is free from the co-op. The other thing they'll do, and that we've kind of seen happening across Delmarva, is transformer sizes. Back in the smaller houses, a 25 kVA transformer was about the right size for the smaller houses. We've learned those are too small for these big houses that are going in. So one of the things the co-ops will do is come out and do a load survey. How many electric motors do you have? Heating requirements, other electrical demands, and assess whether your transformer, the one that's either out on the pole or on the ground that takes that high voltage to a low voltage for your service, is that size big enough to meet your demand? They'll do that for free. They'll make that assessment and determine if you need a bigger transformer. And we know already all new chicken houses going in are, the rule of thumb we're using now is for every 2 houses, it's at 75 kVA, which is bigger than the old days. That said, they'll help you decide or determine if your transformer is big enough. And if it's not big enough, they will replace it, recognizing that it's in their best interest as well, not to start a transformer fire from a transformer that's overloaded. Okay. The last thing would be overhead lines. I think most farms have converted or been installed with lines that are now underground. That's just safer all the way around. It's not the case in all chicken farms, obviously. They will come out and survey what it would take to convert you from overhead lines to underground fed lines, but that will be at your cost. That one is not for free. You will pay for the cost of install. But as you'll see, it may or may not be worth it for you, depending on your farm plans and long-term plans for your farm. So I mentioned electrical poles and inspecting electrical poles. One of the things you can do and determine if you're responsible for a pole or if your utility is responsible is look for the badges and the name tag. Here's a name tag you can see in the upper one. It's Delmarva Power and Light were the ones that installed it. So they're the ones responsible for inspecting and maintaining this pole. Why do we worry about that? Well, they're responsible for coming out and doing these routine inspections as part of code requirements that they have to abide by. So if you look close, I don't know if you can see it, but there's badges there about every 4 or 5 years where an inspection was performed on the pole, meaning the wood, but also all the electric stuff on that pole, whether it's a transformer, the ground wire that goes down. They come out and do that for free, and they're supposed to. And if you suspect there's a problem, they'll come out more frequently and do that as well. So that's part of the routine. Something, again, you as a one who's being provided a service by the power companies can have the right to do. Next time you go out to the mail, look at your pole. See the last time that it was inspected. That's something that's important. Why? What are they going to inspect besides the wood? They're going to look at the protective covers. If in fact you've got these wires coming onto your farm from underground, they need to be protected. Are the covers intact? Here's wires from overhead down the pole going underground. And you can see the gray right there. This gray cover is a protective cover. It's not only an electrical cover, but it's also a mechanical cover, meaning if you whack it with a weed whacker, you don't compromise the electric wires in the process. They'll come out and check that for you. That's a no-brainer. That's something you should have them come out and do. Make sure they do it and check those badges on the pole. And as you start to look closer, a question.
Just one comment for everybody in the room. Several years ago with vandalism that you have, I actually had somebody clip the ground wire from the ground to maybe as high as they could reach. It was probably copper. They probably sold it. And that's not a good thing to have your pole not grounded. So I called them and they came out for free. But you're walking along the road, how many poles do you have? And just while you're walking your dog and inspect to see if your ground wire is still there, it may be gone.
Exactly, and here it is, right here. Any pole that has any electrical hardware above is required to have a ground. So one of the things you'll see coming down that pole, in addition to that protective cover, should be a separate ground wire. Here it is right here. You can see the ground wire here. It's kind of, there's an old wood cover, but it's exposed, but it's not connected to the ground stake. To your point, while you're walking along, check it. When you go out and check the mail, look at these things at the bottom. Don't touch them. But pick up the phone, call your utility, have them come out and check it out. It's no service that you need to take advantage of. I mean, that's what they're there for, not just to give you electricity, but also provide a service. Here's another example. Here's one where the protective cover for the ground wire has been completely broken off. When you break that ground cover off, that could result in, you know, momentary stray voltages winding up in your house or whatever other service line goes to a different building on your property. So again, keep this in mind. This inspection often is done for free. It seems like a no-brainer to have them come on your property once in a while. The other thing is back to the idea that you're your best advocate. What's wrong with this picture? See a nice straight pole right here in the foreground, in the far ground. You got a problem, right? That's clearly a pole that's been compromised. Why? It could be one of the structural guide wires. It could be too much tension in the electric. It's not your problem in the sense of to diagnose it. It's your problem to see it and call it in. Again, you're your own best advocate in terms of watching around your farm and hoping that utility company identify potential problems. This could be a pole pulling too hard on an electric wire going to your farm, could create a short, could cause a temporary jolt into your house, for example. You want to make sure that the power company is well aware of this. So back to what the utilities can do for you. The load control program. Is anybody here involved in the load control program where they use your generator to actually shave load in the summer? A few of you are. But part of that program includes a special meter that allows the power company to watch your electricity and when it's turned on and when it's turned off, and can detect, in fact, when the load switches turn on off. One of the big things we've learned from this installation, where they're supposed to shut off the normal grid coming into your farm and just run your farm off the generator. One of the things we've realized is a lot of electricians haven't wired the whole farm into that. Meaning what? Meaning when they throw the switch and your generator is supposed to power your farm for a small portion during the day, your whole farm's not turned off. Some of your farm is still taking grid power. And that's not the intent, and it's not good to be commingling in that sense. Delmarva Power, for example, can detect this. If you're on this program, if you have them call and do this check, they'll make sure that your farm is wired correctly to this load control program to make sure you get disconnected and utilize the power being generated from your generator. The last thing are our electrical covers. I'll show you a picture, but the other thing that your co-op and Delmarva Power will offer are electrical insulator covers. If you're outside working a lot around your overhead power lines, they'll come in and provide covers for it. They'll also give you those marker balls that we see often for planes and things. They'll actually put them on your farm for you if you are doing a lot of work, aerial type work. So those electrical cover lines, this is what I'm talking about. The orange lines you see up on the primary, up there high, and then down low on the secondary, they'll do that for you for free. Won't be forever. Typically, they like to leave them out for about a week. They have to be inspected. They are subject to inspections due to sunlight degradation, but they will leave them on for about a week. If you've got a lot of overhead work to do, they'll put them on for free. And they'll even come onto your farm to some extent, so I'm told. It's a good thing. If you know you've got a lot of work or construction out there, it doesn't hurt. It's free. The other thing I mentioned, there's just another shot of those covers. The other thing I mentioned were those marker balls. Down here, you know, you've seen those balls in Newark, Delaware, up at the university where I work. They have another technique, not nearly as official. I recommend the marker balls. But, for example, the co-op will come out and put those on your farm in places where you've got a lot of traffic, large equipment, potential for contact with that service line coming onto your property, okay? So guy wires, let me finish with guy wires, and it's by far one of the most common causes of farm accidents that I've seen. What do I mean by a guy wire? They're actually called guy cables. They're those cables, they're mechanical cables, they're wire ropes that help stabilize a wood pole. So these are metal cables, we call them guy wires, but they're cables that tie down to an earth anchor. We've all seen them, right? Let me ask you kind of an obvious question. What do you think the yellow covers do? What's the purpose of the yellow cover? So visibility. What about electrical insulation? I thought as a kid, as long as they were on there, I could walk up and grab it and I wouldn't get shocked. No, that's not why they're there. They're strictly there to help you with visibility. Why? It seems obvious. This is actually along a road. You could understand why cars may want to see this. It turns out, though, especially even off-road and off your farm, we have problems. This is actually a case I was involved with in PA, where a kid at dusk, no yellow cover, was cruising along, hit a guy wire or guy cable right in his chest, which stopped him. It didn't hurt him, but the kid on the back flew about 20 feet head first into a tree and had permanent brain damage as a result. So those guy reflectors, what we call reflectors on those guy cables, are essential, very important. And some people think, and even some of the utilities often argue, that if it's not along the road, you don't need that bright cover. Here's an example of one off the road, headed to a farm structure, but it's got it does have a cover, but it's gray and kind of blends in, especially in the wintertime when there's no green foliage background. You can see that here. Turns out that's not true. Even though code is kind of vague on that, there was actually a landmark case in the U.S. where a lady was riding her horse along. The horse decided to go between the pole and the guy cable. Horse made it. The lady riding the horse did not make it. And the big argument was, well, this wasn't really in a pedestrian area. Shouldn't have had a reflective cover. It turns out it is. So reflective covers are required in any place where pedestrian traffic could occur. So back to your own good and for your own protection, be thinking about these. If you take a ride over to your co-op, they'll probably give them to you. You can go back and put them on yourself. But I think it's important for not only your own self-protection, but your own liability too. So back to the fire I started with. How'd this happen? This is a farm out, as I said, near Erie, PA. This is what the owner gave me a picture of the house before it caught on fire. So that's before the farm fire actually occurred. By the time I got there, which was 2 days later, this is what I saw on the pole. What do you see? I see a transformer in bad shape, right? Mangled. It's hanging by a thread, and the power company had already come and removed the wires, so it wasn't energizing the wires going to the rest of the premises. But it was clearly a transformer on a pole by the road that had been compromised. I got there. They didn't initially let me go on the property, but they did let people take pictures. What I saw was this is the main pole on the premises with the meter, and somebody had been driving around. It was somebody apparently in the evening at dusk, a guy wire, guy cable, no reflective cover. Kid hit it. The farmer's grandson was out there on a front end loader and apparently hit it. Pulled that guy wire, pulled the pole, pulled the wire coming from the road on that transformer, caused the transformer to momentarily short out, and what seems to have sent an electrical surge into the house, started a fire up in the attic, which really didn't take off for about 2 or 3 hours. By the time that all happened, everybody had gone to sleep. By the time I got there, it was pretty clear. There's that same pole from a different view, guy wire, no reflective cover. Kid hit it at dusk, didn't tell anybody, he was only 18, wound up. That's the house. The poor 18-year-old kid was in the house, died as a result. Those guy wires are killers if they're not seen, especially at dark, especially in the winter. There's things you really need to be careful of and make sure they're well marked on your own premises for your own good, for others' good as well. So with that, let me just quickly say, the hazards exist. Bill taught us a good lesson. Things happen in the house, but things can happen outside of the house too. Be aware of those hazards and be cognizant of the fact you have help. Your utility will help you deal with these. And be proactive, you know, use markers on guy wires, et cetera, and engage your utility and take advantage of the free services we have here in the region. They'll definitely be to your advantage. With that, I will not stand between you and lunch.
Any
I will entertain questions.
Questions for Dr. Glancey? No? No, thanks, Dr. Glancey. Well, another excellent presentation. I think it gives us some more things to think about, not only inside, but we need to take a look around our houses and our farms and think about different things. So John and I are going to do a really quick biosecurity update before we eat lunch, so we won't take too much time. John, you want to talk?
We know that it's lunchtime, okay? We're running late. We're going to make this really fast. Well, Jenny loaded up the video we're going to show you, which is 7 minutes long. Just a heads up, has anybody heard of any AI in the United States lately? No, well, we had an incident in Missouri not too long ago. Y'all remember that one? It had low-path AI. Actually, it was the same strain they found in greenwing teal earlier in Louisiana on the flight north. Somehow or another, we got that from the waterfowl into the house. So again, we got to keep doing our biosecurity. The other thing we need to watch out for is we are seeing it in other countries. I don't know if any of you pay attention, but Italy just got hit again. So Italy's fighting it right now. I think France has finally gotten through it. It's all over in parts of Africa and Asia are still fighting it every day. I see updates. So make sure you practice biosecurity, particularly be careful with your waterfowl. And with that, Jenny, you got the video ready? So we're gonna make this short. I'm hungry.
Oh, you're always hungry.
I know, I get angry.
Okay. Can you hear?
The 2014-2015 highly pathogenic avian influenza, HPAI outbreak in the U.S. is the largest animal health emergency in the country's history. In less than 6 months, over 48 million birds on 219 premises from the Pacific Northwest to the Midwest either died or were depopulated due to infection with HPAI virus. Epidemiologists believe that the virus was initially introduced by wild migratory waterfowl and was later spread by people from farm to farm. Avian influenza virus is excreted through the feces, nasal, and oral secretions of infected birds and spread within a flock by direct contact between healthy and infected birds, and from farm to farm through contaminated people, vehicles, and equipment. Because of this, biosecurity on an individual farm is essential. What is biosecurity? Biosecurity refers to procedures used to prevent the introduction and spread of disease-causing organisms in poultry flocks. The following video will provide best practices to improve biosecurity on your farm and protect your birds from exposure to avian influenza and other infectious diseases. It is important for you to provide adequate training on these biosecurity and disease prevention measures to whomever has access to the farm, including family members. Prevention. Understanding how the avian influenza virus is transmitted is your first step in protecting your farm. Ask your vendor to notify you just prior to arrival to make sure they do not enter your property without practicing good biosecurity. Contaminated vehicles and personnel pose the most significant threat to the health of your flock. Restrict vehicle access by maintaining gates or barriers. Clearly post, restricted, no admittance, or similar signs at driveway entrances. Do not allow vendor vehicles or non-essential visitors in or near the poultry houses. Vehicles should be parked off premises when possible. If vehicles must be close to the houses, keep them away from ventilation fans. Vehicle windows must be closed to reduce contaminants and insects from entering the vehicle. Keep a record of essential visitors indicating their names, company or affiliation, address, telephone, and last place visited. This will be valuable information when tracing the source of infection if another outbreak should occur. Biosecurity for visitors requires essential visitors such as repairmen and service personnel to comply with your biosecurity procedures. Proper biosecurity procedures should include boot covers, disposable protective coveralls, head cover, and gloves for all visitors prior to being allowed inside a poultry house. Service vehicles must be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected before entering the farm premises. Tools and equipment must be cleaned and disinfected before entering and upon leaving a poultry house. Have a clean and functioning foot bath at each entrance to the chicken house. personal biosecurity. Biosecurity procedures applies to more than just visitors and service personnel. Protect yourself from becoming a transmission source of the virus by wearing protective clothing, including shoes, boots, head covering gloves, when caring for flocks. This protective clothing must be separate and different from the clothing worn off the farm. After caring for the flock, remove protective clothing and equipment and wash hands and arms before leaving premises. Animal husbandry and management. Migratory waterfowl serve as natural reservoirs for avian influenza virus. These birds harbor the virus without getting sick, but can shed the virus and infect domestic poultry such as chicken and turkey. Because of this, it is important to protect your poultry flock from coming into contact with wild or migratory birds or their manure droppings. As an added preventive measure, keep your poultry away from any source of water that may have been contaminated by wild birds, such as ponds, natural or man-made lakes, rivers, or even wet areas caused by rain near the poultry houses. Make sure feed and water sources are covered and free of contaminants, limiting the attraction of wildfowl and pests. Properly dispose of dead birds using methods such as composting or on-farm freezers, approved by your company veterinarian, state veterinarian, or animal health authority. Poor disposal can lead to disease and increase the number of flies and scavengers, which increases the risk of transmission and transportation of the virus. Prevention starts with you. Maintaining the hygiene of your skin, shoes, clothing, and vehicles can reduce your risk of transporting the virus. Make sure you shower and change into a clean set of clothing and footwear prior to attending a meeting or the local gathering spot, such as restaurants or stores. Use a vehicle that is not used on your farm when traveling to a meeting or any destination. Too often, manure is carried to these non-farm locations where it can be picked up by other growers. Avoid visiting other poultry grower locations if possible. It is a good biosecurity practice to disinfect footwear and vehicle floor mats and change your clothing after returning from a poultry grower's meeting. Use different clothing, footwear, and vehicles to re-enter your poultry operation. Commercial poultry companies have a vested interest in preventing the transmission of the avian influenza virus. It is vital that commercial poultry companies mandate a consistent application of these biosecurity measures internally and require the same compliance from vendors and visitors. As you adhere to these biosecurity measures, you can feel confident knowing you are helping to prevent your farm and poultry farms nationwide from avian influenza and other infectious and economically devastating diseases.
All right, this was kind of something we got a grant and we put that on, but I thought, you noticed the star of the show there? I was just glad they filmed when I was out of the country. That's all I can say.
I'm still paying back my son for being in.
That's right. We had to pay Ryan for that one.
Yeah.
Poor kid.
But that's part of what we do in extension. So, there's a need, there's a lot of avian influenza going on last year. We applied for a grant, we got that. We did 3 videos. So there's this one, there's one for service tech, and then there's also one for backyard flocks. So just the same as we put this on today.
Now,
We saw the need, we saw what happened to Bill, and we certainly don't want to see that happen again. Accidents do happen. I think we've given everybody a lot to really think about, to go home and look at and make some phone calls. And
on those biosecurity videos, if you have employees, we have these in Spanish, Korean, Vietnamese, and I think Chinese as well. So we have them in multiple languages. So if you speak something else, let us know. Maybe we'll be able to help you.
Yeah. So, okay, get your questions.
And with that, guys, we want to thank you very much for attending. One more question, one more thing. And I do want to say one other thing. We know that Bill's not there, and we're still out there, and I'm still working with Bill before he left and all that. If you have something you need our help with, feel free to contact me, Jenny, Mark. One of us will get somebody out there. I will personally come out if I can at any time to help you all out. And with that, Mark?
Yeah, real quick, I just want to share something with those of you that, how many in this room have irrigation systems? Raise your hand. Okay, not that many, but something really important I want to share a personal experience with you. You can also transfer this to the poultry farms for your disconnects for generators. Last year, I was starting an irrigation system, and go to the main disconnects. I always cut the main disconnects off. It's a 3-phase electric, so this is the power unit. Always cut it off before, when I get done, go to it, and thank God the electric panel, the meter panel socket, was off to the side from the disconnect. I throw the disconnect on and that meter panel explodes. Fire comes out of it. If I'd have been standing in front of it, I'd be dead. So just something to remind yourself when you're flipping those main disconnects on, even if it's a generator transfer, do not stand in front of it. Stand to the side of it, and probably be good to have, you know, some kind of gloves on. That's just a personal thing I wanted to share with you, but it was an eye-opening experience, needless to say. So, and the other thing is, if you are working on irrigation systems, as you all know, they're 480, you know, you make sure that power is killed before you even touch the system or get on it, to unplug a nozzle or anything like that. That's just another point added to this. But I want to give Jenny and John and the speakers a big round of applause. I guarantee you, Bill is sitting at the right hand of God up there, and he's happy because we've used a tragic experience to shed some light on an educational opportunity. So thank all of you for coming. If you can